Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Ellie, and today I'm joined by Antonia and Jasmine to talk about the Olympics and some of the science behind what might help us win a gold medal. So, Antonia, imagine you've just qualified for the Olympics. What would you want to do to improve your chances, and which sport do you fancy having a go at?
Create a time machine to be younger.
Right, yeah.
Or I've heard that shooting has had quite a good balance of ages. It doesn't matter if you're female or male, there seems to be similar scores, or even female participants are getting better scores and qualifying better. So maybe shooting, if I also had time machine to go back and start training for it.
I mean, you've got 4 years until the next one. Do you reckon you could make it?
I also have glasses, so I wonder if that will affect my chances.
You know that they all wear glasses in shooting, right?
But they're not, presumably they're not prescription, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Jasmine, what's your interest in this? What would you have a go at?
Oh no, if I started training when I was a toddler, I'd quite like to give a go at gymnastics.
Yeah.
Because it looks pretty cool and they do a lot of cool stuff, but yeah, gymnastics is definitely one where I would need a time machine and go back to when I was a toddler and start training.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Especially gymnastics, you have to start young.
Well, it was the first sport that I was interested in, and it was because it was on the Olympics, and I saw the super cool stuff.
I think arguably it is the most visually impressive sport.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from taking up gymnastics now as an adult. It's just, you're probably not going to get to the level where you could qualify for the Olympics.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. So, going back to what you said about shooting, do you think it'd be easier to qualify in shooting versus gymnastics? Because arguably, shooting is less physically demanding than something like gymnastics.
I would definitely agree. Having practiced gymnastics, it was hard to just get to the physical ability to do anything more than a single move, whereas they do a long string.
Yeah.
And seem to gain more and more height as they do it. I'm talking about floor gymnastics. There is someone who wrote a blog about statistics from gymnastics. They call it the medal count. And they put together a whole series of gymnasts that performed the best and had the most medals. And they also did a series about the age of gymnasts. And actually, it's better to try and be a gymnast now compared to in the 70s, because they've raised the minimum age, and actually medal winners are becoming slightly older, but they're still younger than us. The variation is between 23 and the lowest was 16 and a half years old.
So do you reckon then that physical ability is then sort of inversely correlated with age? Should you be, if you're older, are you already at a back foot to competing?
Yeah, I don't think it was clear from their statistics why it was, but I think anecdotally it's partly the flexibility and having that built into you from early on, and having the right body ratio as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to be quite small to be a gymnast.
I think it's not just small, but arm to torso to leg ratio was also something that was quite useful, which people have also been discussing about with Michael Phelps and swimming, and how that's been a natural advantage for him.
Yeah, that's true. His arm span is huge. But then if you talk about something like shooting, where that's more of a skill versus something like gymnastics, which is all physicality and I guess horrendous amounts of training, is that easier to learn? Do you think you would get better? Are the older shooters better because they've had more time doing the same thing over and over again?
I think that was something with shooting. I think age would probably be a benefit just because you've had more practice, but obviously age could also be a bit of a disadvantage because if you're at a certain age where your hand isn't as steady or your eyesight isn't as good, then obviously age is going to be a disadvantage. If you're older but you're still fit and healthy, I think you could I think age would be an advantage, especially if you've been shooting for 40 years.
You think surely by that point, aren't they always hitting it?
You would think that.
So do you reckon there's like a peak age for certain sports? Like for gymnastics, probably it skews to like, I don't know, 16, 17, 18. But then for something like shooting or archery, or even some of the sports we haven't mentioned, is it better?
Golf.
Golf's an interesting one, because that's extremely technical, but doesn't particularly rely on massive amounts of physical fitness.
I'm just judgmental at golf because, like, they drive around everyone on a golf cart, and they don't even carry their own golf clubs.
That is true. So you were saying before that Michael Phelps presumably has got one of the best sort of arm span to leg span to torso ratios going for swimming. Do you reckon there's other things that are like intrinsic that you couldn't change? Like I can't get taller, so I couldn't be an Olympic basketball player.
Well, in Olympic Taekwondo, there's been a few papers kind of analysing, say, an Olympic Games and looking at height, age, weight and BMI, and also what techniques they were using. And for the techniques, there seems to be sort of almost like trends. So in 2004, they were saying the most scoring points were when they were aggressive tactics.
Right.
And then the following games in 2008, defensive punches and kicks were more successful at scoring.
Ah.
If you follow trends and see what was sort of significant in previous bouts, and then people might train according to that, then you can maybe counter them.
Do you reckon there's a physical limit to how much you could train, how much you can push yourself in terms of Olympics? Because you do see people with injuries, like that is a part of the sport, and training for that long.
Something kind of basic in training is you have to have a warm-up, then there's the actual training cool-down, and then rest periods.
Yes.
Those are also really important. So yeah, you'd have to start, if you're going for specifically the Olympic Games, which are every 4 years, you'd have to start planning around that.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, a lot of these competitors may also be going for world championships, which may be more frequent or interspersed.
These are all things that are under our control. So presumably we've got to start early if we're going to win the gold. Right, we need to be training. Most sports it would help if we started under the age of 5, let's say. Just for...
Yeah.
Yeah. And there you could train too much. There are things you can't do anything about, but you could be at the peak of physical fitness, couldn't you?
And if you're in sort of combat or contact sports where there are weight categories, you could try and optimise for a weight class.
Yeah.
Some studies saw there wasn't a statistically significant difference, but they tend to be on the higher BMI of their category.
Oh.
You know, so if you were heavier, that somehow helped, rather than height, which I thought was surprising. I would have thought the skinnier and taller you were in that weight category, you would have been better in Taekwondo, but being heavier helped.
Is that because there's then more power between your punches? Presumably they don't call it that.
Techniques. It's an interesting one because the scoring mechanism of electronic pads.
Right.
And it usually is a specific amount of like power minimum needs to be before it's going to score. So if you have very light techniques, yeah, maybe they won't score as often.
Okay, so these are factors that you could theoretically control if you had, I guess, pushy parents. And age is related to you. You could time, you know, the world championships or to be the peak. I guess some people miss it slightly, but you could fudge it so that it would work. But what about something like climate or location? Jasmine, what do you reckon?
Those also will have an impact because if you're a really good athlete, you'll often get taken to a training camp that's in a place that has better training conditions or like a place with better training facilities. Team GB for the athletics, like they do have a training camp in, I think it's in Kenya, just because it's like hotter there and it's slightly high altitude, just so like they can just put them through like some tougher conditions just so that they can be slightly more fit versus than if they were just training in the UK.
That's interesting because, you know, I thought, is it better to be under more strain whilst you're trying to do something else, or if you're nice and comfortable like in a perfectly air-conditioned gym?
I guess it's a part of the training, right? So if you're used to being at high altitude and then you go somewhere that's more sea level, then does it suddenly become easier? Have you suddenly got more oxygen and therefore you can run faster? because it's less like pressure on you? Or because you're not used to it, does it then ruin your training?
It should make it easier because you're going from what's like a harsher condition to a more comfortable condition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that probably makes quite a lot of difference for things like long running events, because that is a real big drain on your energy levels. And if you're not used to it...
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why the Berlin Marathon typically has faster running times than other marathons, because it's held later in the year, so it's a bit cooler.
Ah, well, there we go.
There are other reasons why Berlin's typically a lot faster than other big marathons.
They were saying as well, I just watched this today, that the commentators were saying that the pool at Paris is a slow pool because they think it's deeper than other pools, and that's what the competitors were saying, that their times were slower because the pools that they trained in had been less deep, so therefore they were faster. I don't 100% understand how that works, but that was a line of conversation. So I think also, what about something like circadian rhythm? Because some people are very much early birds versus night owls, and how much energy you have changes throughout the day. But if you're an athlete, are you training to compete whenever? Because there was that guy, the meme of the Paris 2020 Olympics, the Paris 2024 Olympics, that he was just sat in the gymnastics waiting for his go. They brought him all the way from America just to do the pommel horse, and he was sat for 2 hours waiting for all his teammates to have their turn, and then they brought him in, he takes off his glasses, suddenly he's Clark Kent, does the pommel horse routine of the championships, but it was all, he was just sat still essentially for 2 hours and then managed to produce this routine. Do you think that's better, or would you want to be doing something, if you could pick a time to compete, what time would you pick?
I don't know how he went from standstill to that, because it's so explosive.
He must have done some sort of warm-up, mustn't he?
Yeah.
I think he's kind of just used to it, because he only really does pommel horse. So I think he would have been mentally okay, this is what I'm going to have to do.
Well, there's the mental and then there's the physical. Sometimes when you haven't warmed up properly and you just suddenly decide, I'm going to do this, and your body is just no.
Wasn't he taking a nap as well before he came on?
Yeah, I think at one point his eyes were definitely closed, which is quite funny. But what about the time? Do you think it would have been better for him to have warmed up, immediately gone on pommel horse, and then he could have gone back to the Olympic Village for a nap?
I don't know. I would have preferred to have warmed up before competing rather than warm up, then wait for 2 hours.
Yeah. There was a study that I was reading, and it said that the performance of athletes varies over the course of the day by as much as 26%. So people that would naturally sleep in will give their performances later in the day versus those that would naturally get up earlier. But obviously you can't choose as a competitor what time your race is.
No, you can't, but that's related to the fact that your body does naturally warm up during the day. So for most people who get up at say 8, 9 in the morning, your peak body temperature is at around 2 in the afternoon. So in terms of exercising, that would be the optimum time for most people who work 9 to 5, because that's when your body's at its max body temperature.
There were some earlier studies that suggested that the average best time to complete was 12 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. I don't know why.
That's a very specific time.
Yeah, that was largely done on swimmers, and that they were saying that they were faster. The people that competed later were faster and more likely to win than people that competed earlier in the day.
Do you think that might have something to do with the metabolism? This is based on a normal person's routine rather than an Olympic athlete's. But, there's breakfast, there's lunch, and then there's that, some people vary how much time they leave between lunch and dinner, and maybe that 5 o'clock window is when they've eaten their food and have kind of metabolized it and are maybe the lightest that they'll be, or their body's not tired from digesting other food.
I guess also because you'd have to factor in meal times around when you're eating, when you're competing. It's all very interesting. But what about something like money and equipment? Does something like having the best shoes make you run faster, or the best type of bike? Can you skew it in that way? If I've got no competitive advantage because I can't make myself taller, can I make myself slightly faster by giving myself the best trainers?
Yes and no. You still need to actually be good at the sport, but
God damn
it. But like technology and equipment can make a difference. So if we look at track and field, there's different types of shoes for different events. So the shoes in track and field, they all have spikes, but the number of spikes in a type of shoe is very different across the different disciplines. Sprinting has the most spikes or pins, and they're also like the most rigid and the lightest, but that's because you want to get as much traction to like pull yourself along and get the most speed, because sprinting shoes are all about power.
Yeah.
Whereas for like middle to long distance, you have fewer pins and there's more flexibility, so the shoes are less rigid. It's not all about power, it's a bit more about endurance. And marathon shoes, they're really different. There's generally no spikes and they're all about like padding, comfort. But interestingly, if you're trying to set a world record in marathon running, there are certain shoes that are banned because they're too springy.
Well, I want those ones. That seems unfair.
Like the lighter the shoe does really make a difference.
Maybe this is where I'm going wrong.
But the statistics from some research is, at most, these super spikes, which they called them, gave them about a 2% increase in running economy, so you had to expend less energy. And that only translates to 1 to 1.5% improvement in time. So you still have to be pretty close to your other competitors if you're just relying on the shoes.
Yeah, but 1 or 2% is the difference between gold and silver in some of these races.
And did you guys not see the men's 100 metre final yesterday? Because literally the difference between gold and silver was 0.005 seconds.
So imagine if you'd have even more spiky shoes, you could have won. What about other types of equipment? Is there anything else that could give me an advantage? Because surely are the bikes standardised in the, like, velodrome? Is that a thing?
So there's like a type of standardization, but it's mostly about the weight of the bike. So in general, bikes in the velodrome can't be lighter than, I think it's 6.9 kilograms, maybe 5.9 kilograms. But like you don't have to use a track bike, which is like only one gear, no brakes, the solid, rigid wheels.
I never understood that. How they had no brakes. How do they get off? I've never seen Chris Hoy get off a bike. He's only ever going round and round.
Slowing down through losing momentum.
Or do you slow down using your muscles?
There must be a bit of that. Do they backpedal?
I think there is some backpedaling involved, but you don't need to have a track bike to compete in the sprint cycling events. You can use a road bike, but obviously you are at a disadvantage because the road bikes are typically heavier than the track bikes, just because you do have the extra parts on the bike.
But between teams, if I'm competing for Great Britain and someone else is competing for France and we have different bikes, is that even then? Is that an even race if their bike is intrinsically better than my bike, despite the fact that I could be the better athlete?
I suppose there are rules around the bike specification, so not just the weight. But how much do they dictate it? Because, then becomes like in Formula One where there are two competitions happening simultaneously, one for the driver and one for the constructor of the car. So do we start having Olympics where you start taking equipment into
consideration?
Into consideration.
Well, then we get onto things like equestrian and financing, because arguably things like equestrian, where the horse is a huge part of the competition, if you've got lots of money and can buy a very good proven horse for the dressage or for the show jumping or for the eventing, surely that is giving you a big advantage.
Yeah, for sure. And also equestrian's traditionally a sport where you need to have a lot of money anyway because you need a horse.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's absolutely true. So then do I need to be rich to compete in the Olympics? Because we've got skill, right? We've got innate skill from all my training being, put in whatever sport from the age of 5. We've potentially got the running shoes with all the spikes. I'm competing at 5:15 in the afternoon for the environment. I've trained in Kenya, so I'm good at the altitude. What about the rest of it? What about the psychology and the support system?
People did studies or did interviews with athletes of their experiences at Tokyo. They did find it harder just because there was no one there.
The 2021 Tokyo Olympics, right?
Which was in the middle of COVID, so no spectators were allowed.
No spectators, no family. It was just the athletes and their teams. Simone Biles she said that she found it a lot more difficult than other competitions because traditionally, her mum always does her hair before she goes out to compete. That time she couldn't. That does have an impact because a lot of athletes, they have their rituals before they compete, and that is part of how they mentally prepare. So when that gets
thrown off,
yeah, it does have an impact on how they perform.
The support system must be a huge part of it. And going to Tokyo knowing that there would be no one there, knowing that the crowds would be empty. That's got to mess with your head, hasn't it? Surely the psychology of it behind that must be fascinating.
Or did it have the reverse for some people where they say, dance like nobody's watching, and so they had less pressure?
Less pressure because it felt like nobody was there, and therefore it wasn't as big of a... Well, they were saying as well, for the women's apparatus finals in the gymnastics, that the arena was so quiet because everyone was watching Simone Biles and the Americans, that it was really throwing them off because they weren't expecting that.
Wow.
Isn't that so strange? Even though there's, I don't know how many, 5,000, 10,000 people watching, they're all being quiet, which is really strange for them.
People talk about home advantage a lot as well.
Oh, that's true.
Saying in football, your team is at your home stadium, you have more fan support. And again, nice statistical analysis is there is very little correlation to say that the home team or the host country wins more medals.
Oh, that's interesting, because you'd think the French would have a slight advantage, surely, for competing in Paris.
Some of it could be actually countries putting in more investment into their sporting program.
Oh, okay.
And so having more competitors to choose from as well.
Because how far out is it decided which Olympic city is next? It's quite a long time. So if you know 10 years in advance that your city is going to be the city, are you then putting a lot more money as a nation, as a government, into sports funding, and therefore your athletes are getting the spiky shoes, they're getting the, track time and the trips to Kenya? That is not my cat, for reference. That is a child outside.
Just hollering.
The 2032 Olympics host city has already been announced. It'll be in Brisbane.
Okay, so that is, 8 years from now?
Antonio, it's not too late to, start learning to shoot.
Get my practicing posing.
Yeah.
There must be more stuff that we have now that we didn't have in, the 90s or even before when the Olympics started that will be better.
Technology for training will be a lot better, so getting more data, even motion capture to capture what exactly each part of your joints or limbs are doing when you're doing certain things, and then you could use it to analyse how you performed and how everything was moving at the time.
Surely the cameras are better now, like you were saying, that is definitely technology has upped that, so you could see where you went wrong because the cameras can move at a faster frame rate or whatever.
Yeah.
You could see where you slipped or where you wobbled or where you bent your knee at the wrong time. So that must help. Do you reckon we could, hypothetically, engineer the perfect athlete? Could we put a mix of all of these things into a pot and come out with someone with genetic predisposition, the perfect age, the perfect training conditions, that could hypothetically then win a gold medal?
Hypothetically, it works for basketball if your parents are both basketballers. For example, Yao Ming's daughter, she's a teenager and she's already over 6 foot, so already got a natural advantage for being good at basketball.
Yeah, that's true. Some things are physical, aren't they?
Yeah.
Is it genetics then? Do you need parents that are good? Do I need, because my parents weren't Olympic athletes, am I already at a back foot? But surely that can't be enough of a factor, because otherwise all the Olympians would be children of previous Olympians.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say genetics is that much an important factor, because, there's not that many, dynasties of, Olympic medalists.
Maybe it's more socio-economic factors that become dynasties.
Or maybe it's more the pushy parent hypothesis. If you spent your entire childhood doing, javelin, are you going to make your kids do javelin as that sort of unfulfilled dream and push them to do more sports, maybe? What about, and this is controversial, do I have a better chance of winning a gold medal if I'm a man?
Is this only in mixed events?
Well, there's only one mixed event, which is the equestrian... Well, that's not true, but all the equestrian disciplines in the Olympics are the only mixed sports, as far as I'm aware, unless they've added new ones.
There are mixed athletic events.
Are there?
I think mixed relay. But there are also mixed doubles in tennis
yes.
and badminton as well.
But they're all competing against mixed pairs.
That's true.
Wherein the equestrian sports, they're individuals. Individual man is competing against individual women however many competitors, 70 competitors.
I think you probably have the best knowledge of the stats, Ellie, since you're into equestrian sports. Have you seen a trend of more high-scoring male competitors?
I was just trying to think of this. I think no. If you take the biggest events in equestrian sport, which are harder than the Olympics, so there's another factor for you, I think it's probably evenly split or potentially even skewed towards the women. But I couldn't tell you without looking into it more in depth. But I was trying to think of the world champions and stuff like that, and it switches between men and women pretty often, I think.
Maybe that's why they did make it a truly mixed competition, because they realised that people had fairly even chances. It wouldn't reduce opportunities.
Should we make all the sports mixed? Because what I want to know is the slowest man, right, in the men's 100 metres still faster than the fastest woman?
I think it's quite easy to see the lap times. And yeah, I think it was like the Beijing athletic competition, not any finals or anything, some of the earlier ones.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'd see a seconds difference. So even the slowest qualifying male competitor was faster than the fastest woman competitor in the same event.
Is that true for all sports, do we think? What about like shot put and javelin? Could I mix them up? Is that realistic? Or are the men in those sports always going to dominate?
No, in those events where it's physical strength plays an important part, the men do throw further than the women.
What about the skill-based sports like archery? Because surely it's not really an advantage to be a man in archery or shooting, or the ones that are more.
I think the physical advantages you get from being a man would be less important in those kind of events, because they're more about just like aiming for the target.
Yeah.
Yeah, to bring transgender and intersex people, there is a whole debate about what constitutes male and female.
That's true.
But especially in sport, because there's talking about whether you went through male puberty, which would have affected how your muscles developed.
Yeah.
There's no current consensus on how to do that. I think some world competitions and championships have chosen to go down the testosterone testing route.
Yeah.
And there will be some people with, XX chromosomes. Arguably, they're genetically female, but they have higher testosterone. So then do you start having testosterone categories?
Yeah, it's very strange, isn't it? This is why I'm advocating for mixing everyone in. It could just be everyone's 100-metre final, and it's just qualifying times. That's the only criteria for entry. I don't know if we can create the perfect athlete, to be honest, but we could definitely influence some factors. I think we pretty much all agree that we need to start young, potentially have a good support system, potentially have access to good funding, good training, good equipment. Might help if you have a pushy parent or two along the way. Is there anything else that we think would affect my chances? Is it too late to start now? I think perhaps we have agreed that. Even the factors in my control.
Oh no, we'll have to see at the 2032 Brisbane Games when Antonia qualifies for shooting.
We're giving her an extra 4 years, are we?
Well,
we're not making her do 2028, just in case. If you qualify early for, the next games, we'll all love to see it.
If you make it to LA, great, even better, but 2032, that's your target.
That's your target for the shooting, Antonia.
Cool. And as a disclaimer for anyone listening from my Taekwondo club, I'm still dedicated to Taekwondo. I just know that my chances are very slim on a world stage.
I think all of our chances, I think perhaps we have missed the boat on that one, but it's always fun to speculate.
In the 10-metre pistol mixed competition, a 51-year-old won silver, so Antonia, still hope.
There's still time.
There's
still time.
And he won with none of the fancy headwear that the other competitors were wearing. He just wore his regular glasses.
There you go then. Your glasses aren't a barrier to Olympic glory. I think probably most people agree that there is no one path to Olympic success, and there are lots of different factors and things that you have to overcome. So maybe we will see Antonia competing. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.